Welcome to the Truth in Crime Case Files. Emily Harris, a young woman in her early 20s. Her obsession with her stepfather, John, sets off a chain of events that shatters their family. Emily, young and attractive, becomes dangerously infatuated with her stepfather, John Harris. John, a man in his late 40s, works tirelessly to provide for his family. Torn between loyalty and desire, he falls into Emily's dangerous web. John's wife, Karen, is in her mid-40s and dedicated to keeping her family together. She discovers the horrifying truth about Emily's seduction and John's betrayal. Karen, driven by desperation and fear, takes matters into her own hands to protect her family, leading to a shocking and tragic death. Join us as we unravel the dark and twisted secrets of the Harris family. This is a tale of betrayal, obsession, and murder you won't believe. On December 21, 2014, the home of the Harris family appeared peaceful from the outside, but inside, a storm was brewing. Emily Harris, 18, had just returned home after her first semester at college. Her stepfather, John Harris, a 42-year-old engineer, and her mother, Karen Harris, a successful real estate agent, welcomed her warmly. However, Emily's return would soon disrupt the family dynamic in unexpected ways. Emily's behavior began to change subtly. During dinner, she chose to sit next to John, a departure from her usual spot across the table. Her laughter was louder, her smiles more lingering. John, initially dismissing this as youthful exuberance, felt a slight discomfort but pushed it aside. Emily's actions became more pronounced. She frequently found reasons to be alone with John, seeking his help with her studies or joining him in the garage where he worked on his car. Her touches lingered, her compliments flowed freely, and her gaze often held an intensity that left John feeling uneasy. While Karen was out showing a property, Emily found John in the living room. She sat close to him on the couch, leaning in as she asked about his book. John's discomfort grew as Emily's hand brushed against his arm. He stood up abruptly, mumbling an excuse to check something in the kitchen. Karen began to notice the growing tension. She observed Emily's eyes following John and her eagerness to be near him. Karen's instincts told her something was wrong, but she couldn't quite pinpoint it. She attributed her unease to the stress of her demanding job and the changes in Emily's transition to adulthood. Emily's behavior grew bolder. On Christmas Day, she entered John's study wearing a revealing dress, claiming she needed his opinion for a party outfit. John, visibly uncomfortable, complimented her hastily and urged her to have a good time. Emily's eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint as she thanked him, her fingers lightly grazing his shoulder as she turned to leave. John's discomfort turned into gnawing anxiety. He began avoiding situations where he might be alone with Emily, fearing the consequences of her increasingly provocative behavior. He couldn't bring himself to speak to Karen about it, unsure of how to explain what was happening without causing a rift in the family. Karen's suspicions continued to build. She started observing Emily's interactions with John more closely, noting the subtle shifts in their behavior. The Harris household, once a place of peace, now throbbed with an undercurrent of tension and unspoken desires. Karen knew she needed to uncover the truth before things spiraled out of control. As the new year approached, the stage was set for a series of events that would shatter the Harris family's fragile facade, revealing the dark secrets lurking beneath their seemingly perfect lives. The tension in the household was palpable, and it was only a matter of time before it reached a breaking point. The new year brought no respite for John Harris. The tension in the household continued to mount as Emily's advances grew bolder and more frequent. Her once subtle flirtations had turned into overt attempts to seduce him, leaving John trapped in a web of guilt and confusion. One evening, Karen was working late, leaving John and Emily alone. Emily saw her opportunity. She approached John in the living room, wearing a dress that left little to the imagination. She sat next to him, her thigh brushing against his. John, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, spoke about mundane topics, but Emily was relentless. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear as she whispered, "You know, I've always admired you, John. More than you realize." John tried to pull away, but Emily's hand on his arm stopped him. She kissed him, a brief but intense moment that shattered his resolve. Guilt gnawed at him, but a part of him felt an illicit thrill. He broke the kiss and stood up, mumbling an excuse to leave, but the seed had been planted. Emily's persistence paid off. She seduced John, and they began a secret affair. They met in secluded places, their encounters filled with passion and guilt. John was tormented by his actions, knowing he was betraying Karen, but Emily's allure was irresistible. She became more possessive, demanding his time and attention, while John grew increasingly conflicted. Karen, though busy with her career, couldn't ignore the changes in her family. She noticed John's discomfort and Emily's smug satisfaction. Karen's suspicions deepened when she found Emily's phone on the kitchen counter, displaying a series of text messages between her and John. Her heart pounded as she read the incriminating words. Convinced that something was seriously wrong, Karen decided to confront John. One evening, after Emily had gone out with friends, Karen cornered John in the living room. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. John, sensing the gravity of the situation, nodded. "What's going on between you and Emily?" Karen demanded, her eyes boring into his. John, caught off guard, stammered, "Karen, it's not what you think." Before he could finish, the front door opened, and Emily walked in. Seeing her parents locked in a tense conversation, she knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. "What's happening?" she asked, feigning innocence. Karen turned to Emily, her voice rising. "You know exactly what's happening. I found the messages. How could you do this to me, to us?" Emily's facade crumbled. "I love him, Mom. I've always loved him. He deserves better than you." The words hung in the air, a stark declaration of her intentions. John, caught between the two women, felt his world collapsing. He tried to reason with Emily, but she was beyond listening. Karen's anger turned to icy determination. "This ends now," she said, her voice cold. "Whatever this is, it's over." The affair, once a forbidden thrill, now threatened to destroy the Harris family. Emily, enraged and feeling betrayed, vowed not to let go easily. John, racked with guilt, tried to distance himself from Emily, but the damage was done. Karen, now fully aware of the depth of the betrayal, began plotting her next move, determined to protect her family at any cost. The stage was set for a confrontation that would have devastating consequences, unraveling the threads of trust and loyalty that once held the Harris family together. The tension in the Harris household was palpable. Emily's obsession with John deepened, and her resentment toward Karen grew. John avoided Emily, but she found ways to corner him, reminding him of their shared secret and her undying affection. Karen, determined to protect her family, began investigating further. Karen's instincts led her to Emily's room. She found a hidden notebook filled with Emily's thoughts and plans. Pages detailed her infatuation with John, the affair, and her fantasies of replacing Karen. Horrified, Karen confronted John that evening. "Look at this," she said, shoving the notebook into his hands. John's face paled as he read. "I didn't know it was this bad," he muttered, guilt washing over him. "We have to end this," Karen insisted. "She can't stay here." The situation reached a boiling point. Emily, sensing her world unraveling, confronted John in the garage. "You promised me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You said we could be together." John, torn between guilt and duty, replied, "Emily, it was a mistake. We can't continue this. It's wrong." Emily's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't love her." "You love me," she insisted, her voice rising. John stepped back, unsure how to calm her. Just then, Karen entered the garage, having heard the commotion. "Emily, this ends now," Karen declared. "You need help, and we will get it for you, but you can't stay here anymore." Emily's rage boiled over. "You're the one who needs to leave." "He's mine," she screamed, lunging at Karen. John intervened, separating them, but the damage was done. Karen, determined to protect herself and John, sought legal advice. She met with a lawyer to discuss her options, including a restraining order against Emily. The lawyer advised her to gather more evidence before proceeding. Meanwhile, Emily plotted her next move. Her obsession with John blinded her to the reality of the situation. She believed if Karen were out of the picture, she and John could be together. Karen discovered Emily's next plan. While tidying up, she found Emily's phone with messages to a friend, outlining a scheme to blackmail John into leaving Karen. The messages were clear: Emily was willing to destroy John's life if she couldn't have him. Karen's resolve hardened. That night, she confronted Emily again, this time with John present. "We know what you're planning," Karen said, holding up the phone. "This has to stop." Emily, cornered, spat back, "You can't stop us. He loves me, not you." John, weary and guilt-ridden, finally spoke. "Emily, this has to end. You're hurting everyone, including yourself." Emily's face twisted with rage and despair. "I won't let you take him from me," she vowed, storming out of the room. In a final attempt to resolve the situation, Karen scheduled a family meeting with a therapist. Emily refused to participate, locking herself in her room. Karen and John, desperate for a solution, were left with no choice but to consider sending Emily to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. The household was a pressure cooker of emotions, each member grappling with their own guilt, anger, and fear. The Harris family was on the brink of collapse, and the next steps they took would determine whether they could salvage their lives or succumb to the chaos Emily had wrought. The tension in the Harris household was at an all-time high. Karen and John decided it was time to take drastic measures to protect themselves and their family. Emily's obsession had spiraled out of control, and they feared what she might do next. Karen, desperate and angry, found herself contemplating a dark solution. Karen's thoughts turned to planning. She knew Emily's routines and habits. One evening, she sat in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, while her mind raced with possibilities. Emily had gone out, giving Karen some time to think clearly. She decided she had to act soon before things got worse. Karen found Emily's stash of pills in the bathroom. She decided to use them to stage an accidental overdose. She researched the dosage, ensuring it would be fatal but look like an accident. Her heart pounded as she realized the gravity of her decision, but she felt it was the only way to save her family. The day of the plan arrived. Emily had planned to go out with friends that evening, a perfect opportunity for Karen. She crushed the pills and mixed them into a bottle of wine Emily had been saving for a special occasion. Karen placed the bottle back in Emily's room, hoping she wouldn't notice anything amiss. That night, Emily returned home late. She seemed agitated, her obsession with John burning brighter than ever. She retreated to her room, slamming the door behind her. Karen and John exchanged worried glances, the tension palpable. The next morning, Karen entered Emily's room to find her lifeless body sprawled on the bed. The empty wine bottle lay on the nightstand, a grim testament to Karen's plan. She felt a wave of guilt and relief wash over her. John, unaware of Karen's actions, was devastated. "Emily, no," he cried, holding her cold hand. Karen called the police, reporting the apparent overdose. Detective Mark Johnson arrived at the scene, a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail. He observed the room, noting the empty bottle and the prescription pills. "We'll need to take a closer look at this," he said, his tone professional but skeptical. The investigation began. Detective Johnson interviewed Karen and John, trying to piece together the events leading to Emily's death. Karen maintained her composure, sticking to her story of Emily's troubled behavior and the accidental overdose. John, still in shock, supported her account. Detective Johnson reviewed the evidence. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him. The pills were prescribed to Karen, and the dosage seemed too calculated to be an accident. He decided to dig deeper into the Harris family's dynamics. Detective Johnson discovered Emily's notebook, filled with details of her affair with John and her plans to replace Karen. He also found Karen's recent internet search history about fatal dosages of pills. The pieces began to fit together. With growing suspicion, Detective Johnson confronted Karen. "I think you know more about Emily's death than you're letting on," he said. Karen, feeling the walls closing in, tried to maintain her innocence, but her facade began to crack. Detective Johnson gathered enough evidence to arrest Karen. The scene was chaotic as she was taken into custody. John, devastated and confused, watched helplessly as his wife was led away in handcuffs. The Harris family's dark secrets were finally coming to light, setting the stage for a trial that would reveal the full extent of the tragedy that had unfolded behind closed doors. The Harris household was a scene of chaos and grief as Karen was taken into custody. Detective Mark Johnson's suspicions had led him to uncover a web of deceit and betrayal, and now the investigation into Emily's death intensified. The media quickly picked up the story, casting a harsh spotlight on the family. Detective Johnson began the meticulous task of piecing together the evidence. He reviewed Karen's search history, Emily's notebook, and the autopsy report. The report confirmed that the amount of medication in Emily's system was far beyond a typical overdose, supporting Johnson's theory that it had been a calculated act. Interviews with friends and neighbors painted a picture of a family on the edge. Karen's colleagues spoke of her growing stress and distraction, while Emily's friends mentioned her increasingly erratic behavior and obsession with John. Detective Johnson noted every detail, building a case that pointed squarely at Karen. John, reeling from the revelations, was called in for a more detailed interview. "John, we need to understand everything that led up to Emily's death," Johnson began. John, visibly shaken, recounted the affair and Emily's relentless pursuit. "I tried to end it, but she wouldn't let go," he confessed, tears streaming down his face. "Karen was just trying to protect us." Karen's lawyer, Jessica Hayes, met with her to discuss the mounting evidence. "They found your search history, Karen. And Emily's notebook paints a damning picture. We need a strategy," Hayes said, her tone firm yet compassionate. Karen, pale and exhausted, whispered, "I just wanted to protect my family." Detective Johnson continued to unravel the case. He interviewed Emily's close friend, Sarah, who revealed a critical piece of information. Emily was planning to blackmail John into leaving Karen, Sarah disclosed. She thought if Karen was out of the way, they could be together. This testimony further solidified the motive behind Karen's drastic actions. With the evidence mounting, Johnson prepared his report for the district attorney. The combination of Karen's internet searches, the details in Emily's notebook, and the testimony from John and Sarah painted a compelling narrative of premeditated murder. The DA agreed to move forward with charges of first-degree murder. Karen was officially charged and remanded in custody pending trial. The media frenzy intensified, with reporters camped outside the courthouse and the Harris home. Public opinion was divided, with some sympathizing with Karen's plight as a mother trying to protect her family, while others condemned her actions as cold-blooded murder. As the trial date approached, John struggled to come to terms with his role in the tragedy. He sought solace in therapy, trying to process the guilt and grief that weighed heavily on him. He knew that his affair with Emily had set the tragic events in motion, and he couldn't escape the feeling that he bore some responsibility for what had happened. Detective Johnson reviewed the case one last time, ensuring every piece of evidence was in place. He knew the trial would be intense, with the defense likely to argue that Karen's actions were driven by desperation and fear for her family's safety. But Johnson was confident that the truth would prevail. The investigation had laid bare the Harris family's darkest secrets, setting the stage for a courtroom battle that would determine Karen's fate and bring some measure of closure to a story marked by obsession, betrayal, and tragedy. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial of Karen Harris began. Reporters and onlookers filled the seats, eager to witness the dramatic proceedings. Karen, dressed in a simple black dress, sat beside her lawyer, Jessica Hayes, looking pale but resolute. Across the room, John sat in silent support, his face etched with worry. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Samuel Blake, laid out their case. "This is a case of premeditated murder," Blake stated. Karen Harris planned and executed the killing of her stepdaughter, Emily, to protect her marriage and remove a perceived threat. He presented the evidence: Karen's search history, the crushed pills, and Emily's notebook. Each piece painted a damning picture of Karen's intentions. Jessica Hayes began her defense. "Karen Harris is not a cold-blooded murderer," she argued. "She is a mother driven to desperate measures by an unbearable situation. Emily's actions, her obsession with John, and her threats pushed Karen to the brink." Hayes called upon witnesses to testify to Karen's character and the family dynamics. John took the stand. His testimony was crucial for both the prosecution and the defense. "I had an affair with Emily," he admitted, his voice shaking. "It was a terrible mistake. Emily became obsessive, and Karen found out. Karen was trying to protect me and our family. She was under immense stress and didn't know how to handle it." Under cross-examination, Blake pressed John. "Did Karen ever discuss harming Emily?" John hesitated, then replied, "No, she didn't. She was just trying to find a way to stop Emily's behavior." The prosecution called Detective Mark Johnson to the stand. He detailed the investigation, highlighting the evidence that pointed to premeditation. Karen Harris researched fatal dosages of pills and then mixed them into Emily's wine. This was not an act of desperation but a calculated move to eliminate a threat. Hayes presented the defense's key witness, Dr. Laura Mitchell, a psychologist. "Karen was under extreme emotional distress," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Emily's behavior was destabilizing the family, and Karen felt she had no other options. Her actions, while wrong, were not those of a calculated murderer but of a desperate mother." Closing arguments were delivered. Blake reiterated the evidence of premeditation and the deliberate nature of Karen's actions. "This was murder, plain and simple," he concluded. Hayes, in contrast, focused on the context of Karen's actions. "She was pushed to the edge by an impossible situation. This was a tragedy, not a cold-blooded murder." The jury deliberated for 2 days. The courtroom was tense as everyone awaited the verdict. The jury returned. The foreperson stood and announced, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Harris, guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Karen's face crumpled as the weight of the verdict settled on her. John buried his face in his hands, overcome with emotion. The judge scheduled the sentencing for the following month, allowing time for both sides to prepare their arguments. In the aftermath of the verdict, the Harris family was left to grapple with the consequences. Karen faced years behind bars, John struggled with his own guilt and loss, and the shadow of Emily's tragic end hung over them all. The trial had revealed the dark undercurrents that had torn the family apart, leaving them to pick up the pieces and find a way to move forward. The day of Karen's sentencing arrived. The courtroom was filled with a sense of finality as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. Karen, looking more fragile than ever, stood beside her lawyer, Jessica Hayes. John sat in the audience, his face a mask of grief and resignation. Judge Thompson addressed the court. "After considering the evidence and the circumstances, I hereby sentence Karen Harris to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The gavel struck, sealing Karen's fate. She was led away in handcuffs, her eyes meeting John's one last time, filled with sorrow and regret. A truth in crime case solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.